Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Heritage University presents all things understanding landscape requests for proposals and contracts. You guys, I am so excited that you are joining us tonight. And if I have not had the pleasure of meeting you, or if you already have had the opportunity, my name is Melissa Rogers, and I oversee the business development for Heritage Property Management Services. And actually, I'm going to be joined by Russell Landscape Group's director or business development manager. And Mike Dangler is going to be speaking to us tonight about all things landscaping contracts, and then really just so also understanding the maintenance responsibilities and some of the things that are going to be really, really helpful for you when understanding how to approach your upcoming budget season. So while we are going to be talking about landscape contracts and landscape responsibilities in totality, if you will, I'm sure that many of you are going to have a lot of community specific questions. And so what we're going to ask you to do is to, just like your declaration, not all landscape contracts are created equal, and each landscape management company does approach their operations a little bit differently. So make sure when you listen to the information that we're talking about tonight that you listen with open ears and always go back and refer to your actual contract. Talk to your manager if you're professionally managed, and then also talk to your business manager for your landscape contract as well. So with that said, Mike has an action-packed 60 minutes of landscape fun. And so what that means is he's going to keep talking through the entire presentation, and we're going to ask that you drop your questions in the upper left-hand corner or right-hand corner if I know my directions. And you can go ahead and put those questions in as they come to you, and Mike's going to go ahead and address those at the very end of the presentation. So if this is your, if you're a regular to Heritage, you kind of know the drill. Sometimes we go right at 60 minutes. Sometimes we do go a little bit over. If you're brand new to joining Heritage University, this class is probably going to go just past that 60-minute mark. So thank you so much for registering and joining us, because the replay is going to be made available to you a little bit closer to the end of this month, and you'll have all of the great resources that we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, I now introduce you to Mike Dangler.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you everyone for attending and having me on tonight. As Melissa said, we're going to be talking about understanding the RFP process and creating an RFP. Then from there, we'll go to the decision process and some suggestions on ways to look at the proposals you get. And finally, the final contract process. Next. I don't have control of.
It's okay. It takes a moment. Sorry about that, Mike.
Okay.
There's a little bit of a delay.
So what's the goal of your RFP? Next. I like to think of the KISS rule for the RFP. I mean, as far as keep it simple, stupid. Next. Now, and when I'm saying that, the goal of your RFP, keep it simple, is unless you're listing the RFP to be attached to the contract, the RFP basically is a tool where you're looking to get the same information out to the bidders about your expectations and about the areas that you're going to have maintained on the property. And what your ultimate goal is, that at the end, you're getting a process that you're going to have everyone know exactly the same thing. And when you're looking at the bids at the end, they're all apples to apples. Next. Creating your RFP, one of the first things, list the property name and address of the association, what is being proposed, the annual landscape maintenance, contact information. And I highly suggest that you have one point of contact. So the property manager is a board member, is it a landscape committee chair, whoever it is, make one individual the point of contact. So that way, you know, everyone is getting the same information and one person isn't telling somebody something different than another. Who is the proposal being sent to and due date? And set a date for an on-site bid meeting. And I would highly suggest, unless it's a small property, but I would highly suggest making it mandatory that each representative have someone at that on-site bid meeting. This way, everybody hears the same questions. Everybody hears the same answers. They're going to it the same way. Next. Benefits of on-site bid meeting. A lot of people, and I've heard it time and time again when I go there, that they're kind of nervous. Landscapers don't want to be around each other. They're enemies. We know each other. It's a brotherhood. We've worked around each other. We've worked with each other. It's good to get it out there. It makes your job easier because you say the same things one time instead of meeting with 3 or 4 different companies, saying it over and over. It saves you time as an association. You're meeting at one time. It ensures the fact that all bidders hear the same thing as long as they listen. You get a few of them in the corner talking, but it gives that opportunity. Most questions will come up at the meeting, so there's less follow-up on your part. Meeting with each individual company, you tend to get a lot of questions afterward. This is your opportunity to ensure that you get that apple-to-apple comparative pricing. From there, set a deadline for questions to be submitted by email, and make it to where when you're setting that date, it gives everyone a time to hear the answers, and they may need to get out there to look at it again, depending on the question. So give time, and then set a deadline for the bid to be submitted. Realize that most companies, a 10 business day turnaround is unless it's a very large property, usually 10 business days is more than enough time to get a bid around. Next. Here's an example of the start of the RFP. The request for proposal for landscape maintenance service community. This happens to be my neighborhood. I thought it's the easiest thing to show as an example, but Brightwater HOA and the address. It's a request for lawn maintenance for the community areas submitted to, I made Melissa the property manager. So the property manager will be getting the bid. You're letting them know that. On-site bid meeting, I should have put there, this is mandatory. August 1st, 2023 at 10 a.m. Deadline for emailed questions. You're given a week after that meeting for questions to be answered, and then proposal deadline, August 15th. So that's a 2-week period. Another thing I didn't put on here, it's nice to say the date that you plan on starting with a new vendor. When do they plan? Or a vendor. And that's a key point right there. At this bid meeting, it's nice to have, if you're having the incumbent bid again, ask the incumbent to come to the meeting and encourage them to answer some questions. I'll tell you, I took part in a very large bid process a couple years ago. A large property, they hired another firm to run the RFP. They had maps, and the incumbent was there. And it was very clear cut, maps of the areas that we were going to measure, all the areas that were included. And we were awarded the contract, which was great. And a month into service, all of a sudden homeowners started saying, hey, they're not servicing the area next to my house. They're not servicing. This is a tremendously large neighborhood. Well, and new development was still going on. They weren't included in the maps. And there were areas that the incumbent was servicing, but in that bid meeting, he didn't step up, or they didn't step up and say anything. So it caused a real issue. So it's nice to have an incumbent that's there and willing to talk. So that would help in the process. Next. Request creating information that needs to go into it again. List the frequencies of service requested. How many weeks a year? What are you looking for? Create a map of the service areas that are numbered. Now, on a very small, if you just have an entrance, a clubhouse, that probably isn't needed. But as you get 4 and 5 areas through the property, like most have, and it steps up from there, a numbered map is something that is useful, keeps everybody on the same page. Where you list the corresponding numbers on the map for the area. And it's also a tool for your management and communication. Next. There you go. Proposal requested for the lawn service. Service frequency, weekly service, 51 weeks a year. We shut down the week between Christmas and New Year's Day. I don't know what you look at, but usually that time period, companies are trying to push in service in a 3-day window due to days off, and it's just a nice time to take a break and get a nice service before and after. Then there's the numbered areas, and then here's an example of the common area map. Next. So you see on here, all the common areas are marked in yellow and they're numbered. The clubhouse, 2 is a small area by the stop sign. Out on roadway, it's separated where 3 and 4, or 4 are the entrances, 3 is one side of the roadway, 5 is the other. Where this comes in handy and why I say it's a good tip. Well, at Brightwater, we have 2 pond areas. 8 is a pond area known as Megan's Pond, and 7 is a pond area. It's a detention pond, but it's very nice landscape. You can easily get into confusion if there's any questions where someone says the pond area and you're thinking something different. By having them numbered, it helps. Now, when you get into operations, I tend to use this a lot on larger properties for that very reason, because internally we may have weed issues, say at Megan's Pond, which is number 8. But our technical service crew that's coming out there, they may not know Megan's Pond. And so it's very easy. Just they have the map, our crew has the map, property management has the map. And so you're just numbering 8 on all correspondence, and everybody knows right where to go. Next. So getting all of that information into the RFP, turf care. Common areas shall be mowed, edged, and blown each week of the growing season and as needed during the growing season, non-growing season. Fertilizer, pre and post emergent herbicides. And this is where I'm saying KISS again. I've seen a lot of RFPs that are page after page, 8, 9 pages, where they go into detail on what they want on the turf care and what is needed. And innovations have come. They've been tremendous in the last couple of years. I'm meticulous on my yard, for example, and I get with a company that they fertilize my yard one time in the spring with a 90% slow release, and it's the greenest yard in the neighborhood. So to say, well, we need 5 applications, we need this. Here's a place where you really need to look at the contract and make sure what they're saying is in there instead of spelling it out in the RFP. You want a complete program, your pre-emergent, post-emergent fertilization. Edging. Hardline bed edging will be with and I put this in bold letters, steel blade edger every other week. This is something I would highly suggest you're making sure your landscaper is using a steel blade edger. Almost all do, but you will still see some that take a weed eater and turn it upside down and weed along the bed line or the hard line with a weed eater. A lot of people don't know it, but the most dangerous piece of equipment on a landscape truck, and landscapers will tell you that, is the weed eater. And it's because that string trimmer, and that's what it's made for, is trimming areas out, not edging. It'll pick up a rock and throw it over 100 miles an hour. Eyes get hit. Windows, there's more damage with that on windows all the time, and it's just something that shouldn't be allowed. So that, definitely mandate a steel blade edger be used on all bedding. And every other week, the way it's mainly done is what we call hard lines one week, bed lines the next. And that's definitely, if you're edging every other week, it definitely holds up. Planting beds. All beds shall be kept weed-free, either by hand removal or spraying weekly. Shrubs are to be kept trim and neat appearance. Shrubs shall be correctly pruned in the winter and shaped as needed during the growing season. So it's a process of almost monthly getting them back in shape, but the time that we get them really back and captured where we want them is in the winter time. Here's something you'll see some landscapers do and some not, and it's something to really ask questions about and look into. rejuvenation pruning, especially if your property's 10 years older than 10 years. Because you get to that point where rejuvenation pruning, hard cutbacks, whatever you want to call it, are needed on those shrubs, either to recapture a window area, safety reasons by a door, or just the health of the plant. Being able to see going out by a stop sign where they grow over. A lot of companies will give you a extra charge for any of that that's done. So look at and make sure and go ahead and ask on the RFP. We want to include rejuvenation pruning. Most companies that do state it that way, where a third of the material that's needed is done every year. So that way it's a process that each year you're identifying some areas, doing hard cutbacks it's usually in March. So watch for that to be on there. Next. Irrigation system. Startup. Standard is a startup where you evaluate the entire system, and then a winterization in the fall. The setting of the times and the irrigation management, make sure that's the responsibility of the landscape. See, at Brightwater, it's nice to have this information at your bid. Here's another one where you like to have the incumbent there, because your companies are going to price it out of the number of components. So if you go ahead in the RFP and say, we have 4 controllers, that's the timers, and 84 zones. So that gives all of the vendors what they need to go ahead and price your irrigation out. If you don't have the incumbent come to the meeting, definitely ask them what you have if you don't know. Extra service. Pine straw, we're going to go ahead and say twice per year, and I want a bale count and a price per application. And make sure that one of those application includes a bedline trenching, and that's industry standard. Seasonal color in the spring and fall, I listed 7 beds. Listing out standard is winter is 8 inches on center. Spring you go a little wider because those plants definitely grow in the summertime. They're 10 inches on center. They'll fill in quickly. Have them list the square feet and the price per application for each installation. Here's another thing that I missed when I was going over this morning. Confirm with them that price includes the regular maintenance of those beds. It's standard that it does, but it doesn't hurt to go ahead and put in there. And then also make sure that's in the contract. We'll talk about that. We have a detention pond there. I'd ask for a price to cut the ponds 3 times per year. If it comes up in conversation at the bid meeting, we'll probably do it late spring, middle of summer, like right now, and then the end of the year. There's different ways to look at detention ponds. I know you all have them, and you probably do, but realize if you do it one time a year, that takes a lot of manpower, and it's usually a higher price for the individual. 2 times per year, it cuts that price each time. You may pay a little more annually, but you're keeping it cut. And then 3 times, our pond's pretty visible. So by having it 3 times per year, I would look for less per time, but I know I'm going to pay more annually. Is it significant? Not a big difference, but you're going to have more. But it keeps the pond looking better. Next. So that got all of the items out as far as what you're looking for in service. You're going to see your prices in that category of the RFP. So that will give you the pricing situation. So now, deeper than the price is looking at the companies themselves, asking some questions that can help you, especially if 2 companies are the same price and you've met with them, maybe called them back in, but you want something to help separate them. This is where the questions come up. Give a company history. Provide a short narrative of the start of your company and where it is today. Include the 2022 annual revenue, not profit. How much did you do annually? Where that comes into play right now, and I know you've probably all incurred it, is in our industry, just like any other service industry, labor is our biggest issue. And there's pros and cons of a large company and a small company in a lot of categories. But in today's market, a large company having the ability to with multiple branches, there's the ability to know that if a branch gets behind, others can help it out. And small company, you got a question: is this the only deciding thing? But it's not. But it's something to keep in mind: the size and the ability of the company to turn and make changes as needed. Client segment. Provide a breakdown of your client base from HOA, commercial, apartment, residential. Give us a breakdown. I'll tell you, Russell, we're probably 33% HOA, 33 commercial, and I didn't put it in here, but we're 33% municipal. So we're about a portion in each. My job with Russell is I work strictly with our HOA market. But that kind of tells you is this another thing that you make your decision based on this? No, but it's good information to have, because it is a big difference having a company that does a lot of commercial accounts, and then all of a sudden, HOA are their best practices being put to use. Action plan. What will it take for your company to be prepared to start maintaining our property? And will you be ready by the date we say? What do you need to do? Here, to me, is a very important one: subcontract. List all the services you will need to use a subcontractor and would not be using an in-house team. And there's an ownership that comes into having your own turf care division, to having your irrigation crew. You want to definitely make sure that they have an irrigation team that's going to be working there for you. And seasonal color, design staff. They have a design staff. Those are things to look into. Here, to me, is the most important. It's a great way to look at. You have your pricing. You can see that, but why am I seeing the pricing the way I am? We call our peak season hours April through October. And they really don't fluctuate. Once we start mowing in April, every week we're mow edge low, and it goes. It levels off a little in the summertime, but other things pop up. And so April to October is our peak season hours. Tell me what your total peak season hours is there during that time. And that's something that's weekly on our property. If they give you a number like 30, that means you have a 3-person crew on site for a 10-hour day. That tells you what they have. So that kind of shows you, if you see a fluctuation in your numbers, you can kind of see, does this play true? And then the other is your total annual crew hours. And this is for your maintenance crew. This is something that any company that's bidding should be able to tell you. They have a budget, and it's not wrong to ask, is what's your annual number? Because if where that shows you and what to look for, if April through October, company A is comparable to company B, but then their annual hours are less, that's telling you that in the off season, they're really cutting the hours down. So you may want to look at that and ask questions. And then a statement. One thing I like to answer, and I put it in whether they ask or not: why should we hire your company? Give them a chance to tell you what makes them different. Next. So all the bids are in. You did your RFP, you got all your bids in. You're seeing different pricing, you're trying to get it around. Here's a nice chart that I'll show you later. It's kind of in our contract, but it's something part of it. But it's a good way to compare your bids. And at the top, you'll see your revenue. What's the monthly maintenance? Then listed for each company. What's your annual seasonal color price? I've asked you to price spring and fall. How much is that total going to cost me with maintenance? Annual straw for 2 applications. One of those are going to include trenching. So you have the straw. Your annual pond 3 times. What's the total annual budget? So this is a good way. People fixate a lot of times on what's my annual maintenance? What am I paying monthly? But if I know I'm going to be doing seasonal color and I know I'm going to be doing straw, this is my budget. So look at the total. But sometimes a company will come in lower on maintenance, but then think, well, I'll make it up on the extras like seasonal color. And here's a good way to do it, or to look at that and compare. So then from there, you can easily look down to what's the peak season hours that you asked for. You can compare where they are there. What's the total annual hours? What seasonal color square footage did they come up with? And I'll tell you, I've sat in RFP meetings where a vendor will say, how many square feet of color do you have? Or how many bales of pine straw? Well, I'm surprised when I hear that question, because it's our job to measure that and tell you what it would take. Now, on the other side of that is, a lot of times, especially straw, that's where you will see a variance. You tend to. And that comes a lot from, you're used to areas being self-strawed. You may have some self-strawed areas that you don't, and that wasn't communicated. So you can see a variance come up in pricing there, or bales. That's the important thing. So the thing I would put, there's nothing wrong with going back to a vendor and saying, hey, everybody else is up on your straw. You may want to look at that again, because the last thing you want to do is think, well, I'm getting a great price there, and go with it. And they're giving you the number of bales. So most vendors, that's what they're going to put out. And then that first straw application say, hey, we're short this much. If it's off from your budget and it's off from what other people are bidding, it's a lot easier up front to say to them, hey, you may want to check this number and look at it. And it helps everybody in the long run. So next. So brace yourself. Contract time is here. You've looked, you've made your decision, and you've decided what company you're going to go for. And you're chewing your nails, hoping it's the best company. Next. Looking up what is a landscape contract. We talked about the RFP is keeping it simple. Well, the contract is the exact opposite. You're no longer keeping it simple. You're saying this is the way our relationship is going to be driven. Landscape contracts are legal agreements between property owners and landscape companies that highlight the scope of services. It's in more detail than what we did in the RFP. They're important as they establish clear expectations, protect both parties in case of disputes, which you never want to dispute, but in any relationship, inevitably it can happen at any time, to ensure a successful project outcome. That's what everybody wants. You want it as an HOA, the landscaper wants it, they want the long-term relationship. A landscape agreement, also known as a commercial landscaping contract. It's a legal document between a client and a landscape company. The document covers the terms and conditions for provisions of the landscape service, such as grass cutting, lawn care. To create a landscape agreement, one can use a contract template. Here's the big item here, which I should have capitalized. It's a framework for negotiation and it can ensure successful project outcome. I'll show you an example of a contract, but I'll tell you, and many times we use a client's contract. They would require that. But in most of those situations, it's a negotiating process. Our COO looks over it, our CFO, we all look over it and say, there's some things here that we just don't agree to, and that's when the negotiation starts. Next. A detailed description to be provided, that's the scope. Next. So here's an example of our contract. I know it's small. I told Melissa that if anybody wants a copy of it, I know some of you I've bid on your property, looking through the list. You've had a copy of it before, but I'd be happy to offer this up. It's proprietary, but it's not anything we don't want people to see. So definitely. Right away, it's in detail. You can see here's 12 items where we're breaking down the mowing and maintenance. I mean, some highlights on this. One, mowing of all turf areas to be completed weekly during peak season. During the remainder of the year, you're going to mow it as needed just to make it look nice. Two, all turf areas accessible by mowing equipment shall be trimmed weekly using string trimmers. Here's where your string trimmer comes into play. Number 3, that's again, you'll see this a couple times in here. All curbs, that's what we call hard lines, bed lines, are metal blade edger bi-weekly. And like I say, hard lines 1 week, bed lines the next is pretty much the way that's broke down to get it bi-weekly. 4, giving you the height of the mowing for your what we call warm season, Bermuda and zoysia. The cool season up closer to 3 to 4 inches, fescue. Talking about 5, the scalping to be done. 6, all plants to be defined, left clear definition between turf and the bed line. Turf fertilization, here we fertilize the turf 4 times through each year. It can get kind of confusing here because we really do 5 to 6 applications, because then we do 3 pre-emergents on warm season. You're going to get 2 pre-emergents in the spring, and then for poana, which is that broadleaf or that grassy weed that comes up in the early spring, in September, October, we do another pre-emergent that will keep that from coming up in the spring. Cool season, we do 2 because we're overseeding your fescue in the fall, so you can't do a fall pre-emergent. So there's controls for poana that's growing in fescue. Most of those are extra billing, and they're herbicides that can be sprayed during the year, the spring, to keep them out and down. Post-emergent herbicides will be applied on all turf locations during the growing season, making sure that we're taking care of the weeds that's out. It's a complete contract, so your blanket applications of insecticides are done. Number 10, or I'm sorry, it's not blanket. I misspoke there. It's insect treatments on spot treatments are included in the contract. If it's a blanket treatment, like in Atlanta, we really don't have a lot of blanket insect issues, except for armyworm. They seem to hit about every 3 years. But if we're spraying the entire, then you're seeing a charge for that. And disease are the same way. Spot spraying for fungicide is included, but if it's something like brown patch in the fescue or zoysia patch in zoysia, then they're more preventative applications, and those will be a charge for that. Then finally, for the turf 12, blowing all clippings, debris from the sidewalk, curbs, tennis courts, just taking care of blowing every area. That, you know, you've got 12 items there that are going over turf care maintenance. So much more detail. Next. So we've taken care of the turf. Now your tree and shrub and ground cover maintenance. In total here, we're end up with, I have 13 items on there, but I caught today that our contract really has 17 items that goes over the care of the trees and shrubs. And you can see there's a lot of reading here. If there's something that you feel, going back to the negotiation, that you want that isn't in here, now's the time where you jot it down and say on there, well, how about this? And get questions. But this runs through the shrubs being pruned. Number 1, a minimum of 4 times per year. As I say, during the growing season, most of our shrubs are monthly, but it is a minimum of 4 times per year. And then 2 is that item that I talked about. Pocket pruning, structure pruning, and 1/3 of the material on site that needs it will get rejuvenation pruning. Now, what they may ask, and it's standard, if you're doing a lot of rejuvenation pruning and you've walked, usually you walk in January, February, and say, these are the items we're going to target. We got to capture this back. We're above the windows. They may come and say, well, we really need to bring a dumpster out here or do something to get rid of the debris. Then it would be standard to charge a fee for that. But the pruning and the activity itself is included. 3, all material should be removed from the property. Perennials and daylilies are cut back in the winter. That's all a part of that winter process. We usually try to get the leaves up by the 1st of January, which that'll come in pretty soon. We'll talk about leaves. And then from there, start the cutbacks of daylilies, things like that. In the spring, installing a pre-emergent, number 7, to help keep the weeds out. And then from 8, you get post-emergent throughout the year, controlling the growth of weeds. And then it is a total care. You're getting the fertilization of the ornamental trees under 10 feet and shrubs. They should all be fertilized. And then here again, you see it on the shrub bed, metal edge There's that metal edging again, time and time. It's 3 times now it's been in the contract. So make sure that they're using it metal edge. Insect control for the shrubs. That's one of the largest changes in our industry, I'd say, from the late 90s, early 2000 to now. And it's really beneficial for nature and the environment. When I got my start back in 96, we would come out, we'd spray everything for insect control. And it just, you'd walk out there and you just smell nothing but insecticide, and it'd be very strong. Now, through the use of integrated pest management, IPM is what that's called, we're targeting things that we know are going to get hit, like azaleas are going to get lace bug. That's something that you know is going to be there. So get out there and do a horticultural oil in the early spring to try to suppress the activity as much as possible, and then target them as it comes on, as the season is approaching. Make sure you're staying on top of it, because once they get out of control, that's when it takes a lot to get them. But your IPM is included, and the insect control for those shrubs. So anything that's seen on there, we should be taking care of. Disease is the same thing with the IPM. We know the things that gets the sooty mold and different funguses. Get out and take care of it ahead of time, and not do the blanket applications. All small ornamental trees less than 12 feet will be pruned for good habits. What didn't get on here is crepe myrtles, and that's a big one. I can't believe I left it off. When I started, like I said, back in the late 90s, industry standard was what we call crepe myrtle today, and that's chopping them off. And what we saw as an industry was, especially the smaller crepe myrtles, when that was done to them, it promotes growth, it promotes flowers. That's why we were trained to do it. You're going to promote more flowering, but what we found was the structure didn't hold up and sustain that flower, and we started getting cracks. We started to have to cable them. So in our contract, it talks about how our pruning of crepe myrtles is taking out crossing branches, removing the crossing branches, looking for improper hat racks, things that need to be improved, looking to strengthen the structure, but not the total cutoff. Now, I say it's not. We all know it's a tree out of place, and 2 or 3, 4 of them will do. But if it's standard throughout the property, we'll give a price. And usually you find that during the RFP, not in the contract stage. As far as limbing the limbs up on trees, we go up to 12 feet, and it's basically what you can get from the ground. Our insurance does not like us get it on ladders, and that's across the board. That's pretty much an industry standard. But then also, it's from 12 feet down, but also less than 2 inches in size. So you get above 2 inches, you're going to have to start getting a chainsaw out, and that's when you start seeing a charge. So next. Now on the scope, we've taken care of our turf, we've taken care of our trees and shrubs. Now it's general site maintenance. What should be done generally throughout the site? Trash and debris, that's a 51-week and item thing. Yeah, your company should be out there taking care. You get questions about what happens in the wintertime. A lot happens in the wintertime, but I'm telling you, this is a big item. It seems like it picks up during that time. But making sure that you're getting all the debris and taking it off site. Post-emergent herbicides applied to parking lot, curbs, gutters, driveways, making sure that the crack weeds aren't coming up throughout the site. That's another one that should be 51 weeks out of the year. 3, all debris shall be disposed of off site, unless the owner has something there for a disposal area. In the event of severe weather, such as major ice or snowstorm, hurricane, of course, those would be additional charges. Being out there, we're there for you. We're there to clean it up, but there would be additional charges after a storm. Fire ant management will be performed weekly. Usually, you'll see the mower have a thing of Amdro or different ant bait hooked to it, or we're treating the mounds. That form is included in the contract. Now we also have the ability to do blanket applications. If you have a property that say your common area has an area where a lot of activities are, people are setting there, and you want to make sure the ants aren't a problem in those areas, you can do a preventative at the beginning of the year to help eliminate that. And that would be additional. So there's general site maintenance. Next. Irrigation. Spring startup is included in the base maintenance billing. This is straight from our contract, and we usually do this in January. Most companies will. You have one is the startup that I discussed, where we'll do a total evaluation, provide proposals for everything that's needed. 3 is the shutdown. Those are in requested most of the time. We go ahead and do a mid-season inspection, and that's good for our operations, but it's also good. Your spring startup is there to make sure that your ultimate goal is, if you have seasonal color on the property, we need to know that by April, when we're ready to do color, that your irrigation is ready to go. Usually by that time, you don't have a need to run a lot of irrigation, but once that color goes in, you're going to need to run it daily. So we need to have been out there, look at it, let you know what the issues are. There's often a pretty nice lag between here are the issues and approval, but then be able to get the repairs done. So that's why we're out there in January. Then we bring them back down. And then the same thing in the summertime. What's happened to the system? The mid-season this year has been an anomaly. We haven't really had to use a lot, but this week, today's the first day of rain that I've seen this evening, but there's a lot of irrigation stepping up with 100-degree days, and the color's starting to show some wilts. So that comes in handy. Next. Seasonal services. Application of pine straw twice annually. Filling it out. Bedline trenching is done in once. 2 rotations of color. And here's where I would say also, we don't have it listed. We'll list it on the proposals though, but that's where the 8 inches and 10 inches come into play on center, spring and winter. Supplemental hand watering. What's the prices? It's already in the contract. So if we're out there to water, if we're on site without a truck, $75 an hour. If we have to bring a water truck, $150 an hour. You know that up front. Winter snow and ice removal. Usually HOAs tend to not need the ice removal as much. It comes in big with our commercial clients, and they may run with a part of the RFP. A lot of them do. It's saying, show me your pricing structure for your winter snow removal and your ice removal. And then most of the time, if you do that, that is a part of the contract. Next. So we went over the scope. All of those items were the scope part of the contract. Now's the good part, the compensation for that scope. Next. Here you can kind of see on the left-hand side, that's an example of the comparison that I gave you for our company. So it's 2,000 bales of pine straw. You can see the bales count there. 1,200 square feet of seasonal color. I threw maintenance billing in as $7,000, and then here's where you would see how much pine straw, how much color cost, and you have your annual budget. It's spelled out there for you. So that's everything that's priced under the contract. What's going to be done, right? Service will be provided 51 weeks out of the year. Going ahead and stating that. Monthly service cards are prorated over the course of the contract. This is a very important item. I know you probably are aware of this, but just to explain, we're not doing the same thing in the winter. We may have a crew of 2 on site for 7-8 hours in the winter per week, but in the summer have 4 guys out there, or a crew of 4. I gotta quit saying guys. So you're getting a different service. If we charge for what you're getting, you would be billed more at different months, but we levelize that. It's called a levelized billing. And here's where this table comes into play. If the relationship ends, if for some reason there's a cancellation, it needs to be run through this table to show one party may owe the other money at the end. It's not a a fee for canceling. It's not a fine. It's not a clause. It's just a mere fact of something was billed that is different than what was received. And it goes both ways. Because say if you started with a company in January and they're invoicing you a higher amount than what you're getting January, February, March, and then April is your peak in May, but then something happens. For some reason you have to cancel, or June you have to cancel. Well, it runs through the system. You would see then that you paid more than what you received. So the landscape company should be paying you at the end of that time, at the end of June when it ends, they should be paying you the difference in amount. We have a calculator that it's really easy to see. You can see the example there. Then we have an automatic calculator that we put it in and see. Now on the inverse side of that, if you start with a landscape company in April and they have their peak season hours out there and they're doing more, that they're looking to start recouping in December and make it up through on into March, but for some reason that contract ends in December, you didn't pay enough for what you received. So you will then see that the landscaper will charge for the difference. So sometimes there's questions about that, but most people understand it and it goes off without a problem. Next. So you have your compensation, you have your scope, you have your compensation of the contract. Now, what are the terms of payments and contract termination? Next. So on here, it spells it out. Payment shall be received in the office of the contractor no later than the 21st of the month in which the service is performed. So you would get your invoice before the month starts. Say the 1st of August, our clients will receive the invoice the end of July. By the 21st is the due date. Then spelling out in there that if payment hasn't been received, if it's 60 days late at that time, you can stop service. And that's you don't like to do that. We really work with clients as much as possible. Really, this clause is in there for that client that you've talked to and you've tried to reach, and you're just not getting any answers. We'll work with clients. We have, especially during the last 3 years on things. One, for example, Waffle House came to us. We do their corporate office. And they came and said, we're in the start of COVID, they said, we just can't have people cutting our grass. We can't pay for it. And our ownership said, look, we understand the hard time you're in. We'll come spray your weeds. We may cut your grass every once in a while. We're driving by there. We'll take care of it. And their CEO shot a note right back and said, we want you full time. You're a vendor that you can trust. So we'll work with you. But that clause is really in there more for the people who just aren't talking to us. We're getting no answers. So, excuse me. So here highlighted, here's our termination. Short and sweet. Either contractor, either the contractor or property manager may terminate the contract at any time without cause, providing 60-day written notice. So yes, this is an annual contract, but it's really a 60-day contract. We're under the gun that we need to be performing. Some companies will use a 30-day. I've seen some use a 90. So really look at that, decide what fits for you. There's another area that could be in negotiation. When people come back and say, I want you to be a 30, I explain to them that we really ask for that 60, because when we get that notice, you feel like 60 days gives you an opportunity, if they haven't hired somebody else, to get it back on track, put it in a program that's really intense, and try to get it back on track. And I'll tell you, we've saved a lot of those. So that's the reason we ask for a 60, but that's another one of those areas to look at and negotiate if you need it. And then also, most HOAs don't pay for straw or color in the contract. It's usually billed upon, but if that's paid, you need to look at payment will need to be done after that. There may be something owed. Next. So we've hit pretty much everything on that. The further stipulations, this is something that has hit in the last 3 years. Next. Things that have happened in the last 3 years that we never dreamed we'd see happen has happened. We all know. And here are items that we were affected by directly. Both parties agree not to solicit or offer employment nor use the services of any employee. So basically what it's saying is you're not going to hire our employees. And if you have an employee of the association that's there, we're not going to hire your employee of the association. And it protects both, but it also, it's just something that has had to happen. As I said, we've had it happen to us. So then the last one, during the execution, this is a clause where we're looking at things of pricing, and gas is a big part of this. I'm sure some of you got hit with an excise fee by your landscaper. As a company, we decided not to. We looked at it and said we budgeted for an increase. As long as it doesn't go above this threshold, we're good. And it hovered right below that and then dropped. So we decided that on new contracts, for that reason, because of the work we would have had to do if it went over, as far as reaching out to people, letting them know it's not in their contract, go ahead and put that clause in there. We don't want to do it. We don't look to do it. But at the same time, it's necessary to be in there that we can give you 30-day notice, and then you can decide one way or the other. Another thing that's down here that's good to have that you can see staring at you right there is initials and RLG initials. Every page of the contract, it's nice to have it initialed so that everybody agrees that they looked at that page, they're good with that page. It comes into play. With Russell, after it's signed, or go ahead, next. So then length of contract. Next. So here's something spelled out in there. We're going to have the contract start September 1st, 2023 to August 31st, 2024. It's a standard 1-year contract, but it automatically renews the anniversary of the date unless either party notifies each other 60 days prior to ending date listed above. Now, that doesn't mean that if for some reason a change had to happen and you hadn't notified, it renews, but it's just that 60-day notice comes into play then still going through. There's no fine or penalty for ending the contract. It just automatically happens. In years past, and I talked to Melissa before this, and this is where you kind of see the multiple year and the benefit of it. I'll tell you, as a company, and I know many in the industry, the multiple year contracts are something that's very hard in this environment to dictate. Can we do it? Yes, because we're under a 60-day cancellation. So you cancel, but you don't like the connotation of canceling a client. If things happen that were different and the economy changes and we're paying even more than what we're paying for fertilizer and different items, things hit. The labor has shot up. There's times where you have to increase your price. And so the multiple year would be given if requested, but it's really not a benefit. Don't look to see a lower price if I'm willing to offer you a 3-year contract. Those are the days of, sounds like forever, but 5 years ago. Because definitely this is one of those things that with our economy, it's changed the way contractors look at multiple year contracts. Next. So then the signature page, what we all love. Just the basics are there. You've already initialed all the other pages. So this is the final page. You can see information is the management company, information for the physical address, and then a place to sign. You'll see with Russell, the only people that can sign that contract is our COO, our CFO, an officer of the company, and Teddy Russell. So those are your 3 that will sign with us. Next. After the contract signed, what will you look to get? A lot of people in the RFP will ask for a COI. I can give you a blank one without a name on it that shows what our coverage is. But where you get the real one is after we contract with each other, we will be getting you a certificate of insurance from our insurance company that lists you, lists Heritage, if they want it, anybody that you say needs to be listed, then our W-9. And that's it. We're ready to get started mowing for you then.
I love it. Okay, so I feel like we have to, you did a great job, and that was a lot of jam-packed information in such a condensed amount of time. So thank you for putting that together for us. Just to piggyback off of what Mike was talking about, I've actually had the privilege, and as a community manager, and as many community managers, we actually get a lot of our education from partnering with very professional experts such as Russell Landscape Group or some other great companies out there. But more specifically, I've had the privilege of working on site for a very large scale association where the incumbent was Russell Landscape Group. And, we have the ability to, and a lot of people kind of tinge when you started talking about doing a group RFP meeting and making sure that the incumbent was in the room if possible. It's a mixed bag of responses, but there is so much value and benefit, like you pointed out. So if for some of you that were listening to that went, oh my gosh, we would never do that. It's also such a fantastic opportunity. And Mike, I know you'll agree with me. If you've got homeowners that have no idea, what's going on with landscaping, or they're not really quite sure if they want to join the landscaping committee, if you have a larger community that has maybe a lot of foliage or ground cover. And so this is a great opportunity also for education of your homeowners or of community volunteers. So don't just look at it as, oh my gosh, we're going to have competitors in the same room and we're going to watch them duke it out. No, it's an education opportunity. And really what Mike said is, and what I want to make sure you drive home, everybody, is it gives everybody the opportunity to hear the exact same information. And as Mike pointed out, when the bids come back, apples, bananas, pineapples, this is where you as a board can go back and say, fix it, this isn't right. Or this is where the manager or you as the board, again, committee, you go through and you say, okay, this is where we see some of these stipulations. The really great news, I didn't even think that you were going to do this because you're so awesome, but cheat sheet friends, I've got a landscape analysis spreadsheet that I'm also going to give you guys because this is real. This is what we do as community managers. And, we're kind of the opinion, if I have to do it once, that means another association is going to do it. So there's no need for us, like you had talked about. Yes, it might, specific things might be proprietary, but for the most part, you're going to still have bale count. You're going to have mulch or pine straw. You're going to have maintenance, and you're going to have spring color or fall color, or, you know what I mean? So from that standpoint, there are so many questions, and we've gotten some really great involvement here. So I'm going to kind of, some of you in the audience that are staying for questions, you might hear that I put two questions together because some of it was just relevant to the topic. So I'm going to start with specifically, there were a lot of questions initially when you were talking about the RFP process, and actually having the conversation and the plat maps and so forth. Here's where some really great conversations and questions came out of. Is it good to provide a copy of the property plat and the irrigation plat during the landscape on-site meeting? And before you answer this question, as a property manager, let me answer yes. But let me just tell you, we are lucky half the time if there is an irrigation map. So I'll just say that. But go ahead, you answer that one, Mike.
I'll say the work it takes to get a landscape map out to people, or a irrigation map out to people, isn't as beneficial in the RFP process as it is in when you start that contract. That is, your landscaper will love you. Because I'll tell you, everybody, it may vary charging $9 a component, or some charge $12 a component. But I can't tell you how many times I've been in an RFP where that's the first question that's always asked. If you don't give it, it's how many components do you have on your irrigation? And sometimes rarely does the manager know that off the top of their head.
Right.
And the incumbent will be real slow to give that information, or say, well, I'll get it and give it to you. Well, one, they should come to the meeting with it. And two, my feeling is, I don't want you guessing. If I know there's 100 components out there and I think you're guessing and going to put 80, you're going to lowball me. So I want everybody to have the same information. But yeah, and the plat is good as long as it's marked. If the plat of the property, a lot of times it's big and bulky and bigger than what you need, that a small map can show it. But a plat is good because a lot of times it goes into detail of how it's planted and what's going on. We just want to know the areas. We don't know what, we want to enjoy the sausage, not what we need to make it.
Thank you. Is pine straw more expensive than mulch? And which is best for communities? And then we've got a couple of follow-ups on this, because mulch can be defined as play safe, which is the rubber stuff. Mulch can be wood chips, which was a question that was asked. Can't we just use free wood chips? I don't know who has access to free wood chips, but my answer is yes, if you do. And then there's pine straw. So go ahead, Mike, if you wouldn't mind just kind of talking about what your thoughts are related to pine straw versus mulch. And then is there really a significant cost differential between them?
I'll start with the last question. Free wood chips. What you have to do with that is, yes, you can, but you have to make sure that it's aged. If you put down wood chips that has, your mulch that you're getting has set. If you drive in the in the fall or spring when it's cool, you'll see steam rising off those mounds. If you look at an area that has mulch beds in piles, and what's happening is it's composting and it's breaking down, and there's bacteria, there's things in that mulch that will physically leach the nutrients out of your plants. So if you're just putting down, if you had the chipper out there and there's a pile and you got them to put it down around the plants and everywhere, right, you're going to end up having issues. And I've seen it really hurt plant material before, where you think you're doing something good. So as long as you age it, it's fine. Yes, it won't have the same look, because most of your hardwood mulch is what they call double cut. So they go through the process twice, has more of a uniform look to it. Most of the mulch that comes from your chipper is going to be very, very inside. So you get what you pay for in that. Hardwood mulch, pine straw, I'll tell you, it's a preference. Georgia is huge on pine straw. You go outside of Georgia, maybe through the Carolinas is too. But I moved in to Georgia in 1987. My boys went in Kennesaw. I'm a Southerner, but the one thing I hold on to in my house is hardwood mulch, because I love it. I'm from Ohio. I like my hardwood mulch, and it is beneficial to plants too. You'll see more roots, but homeowners don't like it. I did a huge job down in Noonan. They switched to hardwood mulch, spent a lot of money, and a year later was tired of their 3,000 homeowners complaining about the hardwood mulch on the parkway, and they redid all of it, because it's just, be careful. Make sure you have, if you're changing, make sure you talk to everybody, because you're going to hear it. Pine straw is, if you're doing it, the hardwood mulch is about the same price per application of 2 applications of straw, and you only have to do it once a year. So your cost is relatively the same. Now, you have to realize, if you don't have hardwood mulch now, you need to establish a barrier. You need to get it up. Say you're going to do closer to 3 inches. So it's going to cost you more that first application. Then annually, you're only doing 1 inch. So it's about 1/3 of that price, roughly. So hopefully, I said it fast, but hopefully
you did.
You're going to see, you don't really see a savings. If you're strawing once, you'll never come close to that price. You're saving money by strawing once. If you're strawing twice, you're going to be about equal in price for the replenishment of the hardwood mulch.
Okay, so you answered those beautifully on so many different levels. And I didn't even think about that with, freshly cut wood, and then having the bacteria break down and so forth. That makes complete sense. And I could see where somebody would want to be able to offset a potential cost. We sometimes have to get resourceful. And one of the other things that I really like when you do RFPs, depending on the size of the community, is you guys also take in consideration the natural fall of the pine needles if there are pine trees within the brush or the scope of the area that you're looking at. So what you pointed out is when you do switch, or even when you're replenishing pine straw, we talked about trenching earlier, and that's where you guys dig up. When you dig up or when you trench everything, now you're bringing it below the sight line, friends. And that's where he was saying that you need to build it up so that that whole mound, that glorious, because let's face it, our homeowners are looking with their eyeballs and they're judging your decisions of being a good board member based on your landscaping. And so if they don't know the nitty gritties like what we're talking about right now, they're going to think that you just spent all this money for nothing. But I'll say this, some of the other alternative options are that we didn't even address in here are long-term plants, right? Offsetting, and I'm not talking about juniper. I'm talking about, offsetting some plants that could reduce the square footage of the mulch or the pine straw. And that's also equally expensive, just in different ways. Would you agree?
A big mistake. The evolution of a community is things are planted small, a lot of grass, and it looks great. And then years later, plants grow, you get shade out, and all of a sudden you're losing grass, and your pine straw number goes up. And what I encourage communities to do is to start a program because it can be a big ticket item, but pick a ground cover like Asiatic jasmine, something like that, and work on it a little each year so that you have a program that you're not seeing your pine straw shoot up, because it takes about 3 years to pay off. The saying on ground cover is it sleeps, it creeps, it leaps. So that third year is when it covers and you don't have to straw anymore. And so it's targeting it early on in the phase where you're losing grass is important, but then having a program of let's take a little bit of our budget each year and target some areas. And homeowners like seeing that. If you communicate to them and say, we're doing that here this year, we'll see it pay off in 3 years, and then each year you start seeing it. And the problem with that is grass frames in your community. You drive through and you see it. Well, you start losing it and you see straw all over. All of a sudden, it's a looseness to the community. You no longer have that frame.
Very good. And we actually just got a clarifying question to the original question we just asked, and it was about the RFP process. So thank you so much for clarifying this. So the real question that they were talking about, or the point that they pointed out when we're doing group RFP, and we have all of the bidders, if we're going out to 5 people, we've got them all in the room. The question was, is it recommended that all questions and answered be shared with each bidder, whether they ask the question or not? So let's just say, for example, we're talking in person and then somebody else has a follow-up question. Do we copy all in our response?
And I kind of went over that. I may have jumped, and you'll see it in my slides if you get them. But yes, is a short answer. That's why you give a week. A week after the RFP, make a due date. So that gives you time just to list every question out. You don't need to list who asked them or anything else. These are the questions that were asked. These were the answers. And then that gives them a week, because they may need to go back. It may have popped up something they didn't think about. And that's where you get the true apples to apples. If somebody missed something and all of a sudden, wow, that was a great question, and I missed that area. So yes, definitely. And everybody, and it should be an email form. So
I agree with you on that. And one thing that I want to point out too is we're talking about, oftentimes for all of you in the audience, the most expensive line item, maybe other than your insurance at this point, that is going to be on your operating budget. If you are capable of affording professional management, your management contract is also going to be very similarly built like the landscape contract is. It's very meaty, if you will. And so some of the same similarities, if any of you have ever gone through a bid process of any sort, you're going to see some of the similarities and just with some of the questions. So I think from that standpoint, this is not sensitive information. This is information that we want to really make sure that everybody has access to so that we avoid those apples, bananas, and pineapples RFP responses. We're never going to get apples to apples, but we might get a pear. We might get it super, super close. So in any case, thank you for that follow-up question. We've got even more coming in. All right. Should the landscaping company provide the community with a copy of their holiday schedule?
I think, I'm all about communication. And if that's something you want and you want to see what it is, definitely ask that. I tell our people, you may think you're a landscaper, but you're a customer service representative that does landscaping. And it's part of the communication process. And then starting in with the stuff like the ground cover cutbacks, things like that. So those are the things. And companies we give a newsletter that kind of tells you what our schedule is, what we're doing. It's kind of generic to everybody, but it's generalized of what we're doing this month. So yes.
So, and that's a common question that we also get as managers. What's the frequency schedule, of each particular thing? And very similarly to what Mike just said, that can change. You could see us we could have 0 rain and we're out there because the grass is or we could be in swamp and we haven't seen a landscaper in sight for 2 weeks. So, it can change. So that's why we typically don't always like to have, strict schedules posted. We like to be communicative, obviously, when there are things that are important that need to be said, but that's very similar that we get that. And something else with you called it levelized billing when it comes to the contract. For those of you that also have swimming pools, that's exactly what they do as well. The pool, if you have a seasonal swimming pool, you might only have that contract in for a period of time. So think about the growing season versus the dormant season. You're going to see a lot more activity in peak periods of the year versus others, just as Mike pointed out. So think about this. All right, so now it's coming to my more favorite parts. We're going to talk about insecticides and spraying for weeds, and then detention pond management, because we got a couple of all around about questions surrounding that. So as it relates to weeds, as individual homeowners and as a community manager, sometimes it's very difficult to combat weeds, Mike, because 2 people on that street, man, they are faithful. They get their home taken care of. They get pre and post emergent, and it is awesome. We're not even talking about the common area at this point, because the common area is perfect, right? But then we've got 8 other people on the street that don't, and then the seeds fly, and then all of a sudden now the common area has weeds in it that we're having to fight a little bit more, and then that whole street is starting to get notices about the weeds in their grass. It's so, don't forget, everything that we're talking about right now tonight is organic. Pine straw moves, mulch moves, earth moves. And so there's a lot of disruptance to some of that. So when it comes to insecticides, when it comes to spraying, I have seen that some people have that contract included in their landscaping. Others do not have that, depending on the landscape vendor that they are partnering with currently. So the questions that we have is, should weed control application automatically be included as a service from my provider? And then we've got a couple of follow-up questions, but
yes.
Okay. I love that.
Now, I'll tell you this. If I come across an association that says we have someone else treat our turf,
okay,
I say thank you, but I'm not going to bid on it. And then you don't see it that much anymore.
Okay.
But to me, turf care is a vital part of what we provide. It's in-house with us. It's something you take pride in, and there's an ownership in. To me, it's my background. That's what I got started in the industry in. As an account manager, if I'm out there and I have a weed issue, I want to go to a fellow employee or to my supervisor and say, we've got this issue. We've got to get out there and have it be an urgency. I don't want to have to call another company and say, I know we're paying you, but we need you to get out here and treat it. But it goes hand in hand as ownership. It's something where as a professional landscape company, they should be. I'm not saying everybody needs to be in-house, but at the same time, you should have ownership over the weeds and the turf.
So the follow-up.
Oh,
sorry. So the follow-up question to that was, can they be month-to-month agreements? Is that typical? And I think you kind of addressed that because it should be part of the landscape contract.
Yeah, and let's face it, it goes back to, you don't want to be making changes all the time, but it's a 60-day contract or it's a 30-day contract. This isn't something that now I will say, and I don't think I said it. I did when I was going over this morning by myself, really look at that contract. Because a couple of years ago, there was a major company in town that started having a penalty if you canceled during the contract. And I sold probably 3 or 4 jobs that then they called me back and said, I don't want to be with them, but I can't cancel them because, and I said, you're with this company. And they said, yes. And it was something that the decision why they did it, really look for a cancellation penalty, because that is not industry standard. And it should not be a part of it. But in the end, it's a 30, 60-day contract. If you're not happy with it, then I'm sure the weeds and the color is not the only thing you're not happy with. So really communicate.
That's awesome.
And another thing about the 30-day, I'm sorry, your pre-emergent that you do for Poana in the spring, there's so many applications you do that are for months from now.
Right.
So in October, I'm making sure you don't have weeds in February. So it's tough to judge what's happening there. It's a long-term thing.
So you hear this, board members, community volunteers, and homeowners. He's talking specifically related to the common area of the association, but everything that he's talking about is equally applicable to the individual lots in which your home resides. Okay.
Now, I'll tell you one thing on that, though, and I have that. And my lawn care guy was out here today. I have goose grass all over my backyard because a slope goes down and my neighbor doesn't treat it.
Yep.
What I did, my neighbor was out mowing. I went over and said, hey, I know you're not treating your grass on the side here that's flowing into my backyard. Do you mind if I have my chemical company treat it? I talked to them. It doesn't cost me very much more. He's fine. He's getting his weeds treated over there, and it helps out that way. So there's a tip. Talk to your neighbor. Don't point fingers, but say, hey, can I do that? It cost me like $5 an application more.
That's so awesome. So. That's when things work out the right way, in my opinion. Yeah. And that's very generous of you too, to even acknowledge that and provide that option. So now when it comes to detention ponds, and these are kind of common questions that we tend to get, who is the deciding authority as to what foliage gets to stay in the detention pond and what doesn't, and who sets the frequency schedule for really how many times I should have the detention pond mowed out? So we've got a couple of questions where people are asking, is it the landscape company? Is it stormwater management? Is it a free-for-all?
It's the county that you live in. And they vary. They vary greatly. Gwinnett County is very strict.
Yes.
And a strange thing, what you'll see is, we may have some government workers on here, but I'll just tell you, when the housing trend went down and there wasn't a lot of inspections for homes, the detention and retention pond inspections shot way up, and we were seeing a lot more sightings happen. So I think a lot of homeowner inspectors shifted over to be detention pond inspectors. But they're going to tell you what needs to happen. And from there, it's a professional. They're going to tell you it needs cleaned. Usually your plant material you can't have woody ornamentals on it, like trees, things that saplings that are going to be a tree, something that's going to take root. But plants are fine. I'll tell you, I had a nightmare. I'm on my board. And 2 years ago, I got on it, and we were cited by the county. And what I saw was when they were cleaning, and I met with my landscaper this week. showing them the plants I want to cut, where I want it cut, because when they were doing their cleaning, they cut it all the way to the crown of the plant, all the way too low instead of leaving some growth. And so it killed those plants, and all of a sudden we're cited by the county because we have erosion issues and we have to plant all over in that area.
Wow.
So it's being realistic and looking at it. We planted it, but now I'm getting with them to make sure, hey, don't cut too much. These plants over here, things like Lespedeza and lovegrass, don't cut them at all because they're beneficial. So getting somebody out there, a good landscaper that knows what they're talking about as far as plants. There's things like, usually you'll have lovegrass on an upslope. You'll see that on roadways. And then on downslopes, you have a plant called Lespedeza. It's a weed in our turf, but it's a great plant on downslopes. And when you see those, you don't want to touch them. You want them to stay there, to go through and do more selective. So,
well, that's super helpful. And this is like an age-old question of, and I think you had alluded to when you were going through parts of the slide, you put 3. Yeah. Your frequency was 3, and you gave the example as to why. And that's just what Mike was saying. That's a qualified individual assessing the detention pond or the circumstance and making the recommendation that this is what the frequency is, or the board is setting that expectation in that RFP. And I think that that's also part of the question, like who, how often do we need to clean them out? And you are articulated very well. Oftentimes, especially in this day and age with the last couple of years, we're starting to see that the ponds are only being cut once a year. And you had mentioned that, yes, that can be done, but it's a much bigger overhaul process, and you might potentially have to bring in equipment.
But the last thing you want to do is not cut it every year, because then your fee is just going to go up and up to get in there and clean.
Okay.
I had an association a few years ago that it was $13,000 to clean out what they had let grow for years. And I told them then, get on a program. And I was, yes, we will, cut it regularly. Well, then 4 years later, they called me up and said, we just got cited by the county again, and we haven't touched it since it's been out there. So it's going to be that high. It's one of those issues the county's going to look at, and you're going to have to cut at some time.
Right.
So more preventative, and one will get you by in most cases. It's really how much sun you have in there. What's the area like? Looking at it, some work great with one. The one we have is in full sun, and it's just the material grows regularly. So that's why we do it 3.
So it's kind of a specific question, I think, potentially, but it's on the same vein of what we're talking about right now. It says this particular board member experienced some discrepancy between what was considered to be an undisturbed or wild natural area. So, and there was some feedback. So it says, and they asked for additional money to clean the area. Is that standard? And how can we prevent that behavior? It sounds pretty specific, and it could be that it might be overgrown, but maybe you're hearing the question there too.
And it's a great point that in what should have happened in an RFP is what one considers a natural area, another doesn't. But if it's mapped out and it's said, even maybe it's not weekly maintenance, but you brought it up, Melissa, as level of service. Maybe this is something once a month during the growing season, I want this area cleared. But if that wasn't brought up in the bid process, it was just looked at as a natural area, then yes, it's a difference of opinion, but it's really, it matters the size of it and what they're going to do. It could have been alleviated. The issue is if in that bid process it was brought up, we want this area cleared or just mowed and sticks picked up, whatever you want, whatever level of service, once a month, then you're setting the level of what is going to be done. And that's exactly what we discussed in the RFP.
Right.
Make sure you're doing that.
Yep. And friends, we could have an entire class and do on stormwater management and the blue book and county regulations and all that fun stuff. So excellent questions. And to the board member that asked that question, I actually see that a lot more, sadly, than I'd like. You know, some consternation between what is part, and then also to make sure you know what your meets and bounds are of that particular area, because you also want to make sure that you're not encroaching into something that is not even the association's responsibility. So, but great questions. Okay. So, I love this one. In the day of age of things being green, no pun intended, can we ask landscape companies to use electric blowers? What about small lawn mowers when you're dealing with townhome communities or tighter spots? And it says, so essentially they're asking, are there alternate options that an association can ask their service provider for?
We're close on the blowers. We're not there. And the state, in fact, passed a law this year that municipalities cannot regulate the state of Georgia. They cannot say that they will only allow electric blowers.
Gotcha.
And there was a lot of push each way, and we're just not there. It's the batteries that's a problem. The mowers are a lot better. It's the power needed. It works great for a homeowner, but if you're using that all day long, the batteries just aren't there right now. A project specific, if it's a very nice job, Georgia Pacific, you've got to use electric there. Well, that's on one job, and you can do it there, but they pay for it.
Right.
That's where it's going to be. Can it happen? Yes, you're going to pay for it. Same on the size of mowers. Dictate the size, and I'm sorry I should have went through that in the RFP. If you have a size that you want there, so that everybody's pricing small mowers. But to come back and say afterwards, I only want a small mower. I did a bid probably 6 months ago. They went with us that after we started walking, we did the RFP, then we have what's known as a kickoff meeting with our team. And they said, well, we only want small mowers here. It's like, whoa, this isn't the way it was priced.
Right.
We look at an area, if it makes sense, if it's supposed to be a small mower, we'll put a 21 on. If you look at our bid, it's a 21, a 36. I gave her my hours report that shows this much 21, this much a 36 mower, this one 44. And I said, I'll price it for you, and I'll show you this hour report each way to see how the hours go up with the push mower, and the price then goes up. So that's where it hits, is do you want to pay? Now, I'll say this, most of the time, and I let homeowners know that when I'm walking, it's not the size of the mower, it's the speed. I age myself with my white hair, but when I was behind a mower, they were belt driven, and we just couldn't go that fast with bigger mowers. Mm-hmm. It just didn't go. Right now, they literally can fly, and it's having a relationship where you're talking to your account manager saying, we're getting gouges, we're getting this, looking at it. We want everybody to be happy. Go to the crew and say, as a manager, I go to the crew and say, if you don't start slowing down and making sure this doesn't happen, we're going to have to decrease the size of the mower. So it's a communication thing. But yes, you're well within your right in the RFP, and there's neighborhoods that do that. A lot of the 55 plus have that, to where we only want front yards push mow, but everyone knows that. Everyone prices it that way, and it is so it's that apples and apples again. It's not fair to go afterwards and say that, but if you bid it that way, then you know what you're paying for.
It's a lot of information to take in, Mike, but thank you. You're so awesome with being so generous with being able to answer that, because these are all real. Yes, in every landscape RFP, these are going to be legitimate questions. And we often see times too, like, we want this section real mode versus, and you have to make sure what's the type of grass to be able to do that so that you don't burn it. There's all those things that go into it, which is why if you didn't get the scope right the first time, also use that opportunity to make clarifications and corrections, just like Mike talked about, when you give the opportunity for other bidders to submit questions. Same difference for you as board members. Remember, you're volunteers. You might not be perfect when you do this bid out the first time. So cut yourself some slack on that too and give yourself that opportunity. But if you do know, and if you have a mental mindset, as he pointed out, make sure you put as much detail in there as possible. Okay, so it looks like we're coming to about our last question, which is excellent. And thank you to everybody who's one, stayed, and two, submitted these awesome questions. How would you advise an association to remediate irrigation services which result in a water leak valve that produces an excess water bill? That might be a smidge specific. Other than without payment of the irrigation invoice, can an HOA require that the landscaper contribute to pay off the high water bill? Okay, full circle. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, it's tough.
Right.
And it's specific in that, is this something that where it was leaking, it was running across a curb and it should have been seen? You can have leaks that are running. I had one. I'm over my landscape in my neighborhood, and I had one that was running down when the system ran. There was a large drain there, and water just happened. I was there one day when it was running early in the morning. I usually wasn't around there. I could hear a gush of water. I would have never known if I wasn't there at that time. So it's tough, and most landscape companies would say no. There's innovation where it alerts you. It's very cheap now that they have systems that if you have a mainline leak and it's leaking someplace at the back of the property where nobody is, it alerts you on your phone. And it's things that used to be ran by a computer years ago. Now it's smartphone technology. It's not that expensive. There's systems that can be put in that I would suggest having that happen, talking to your landscape company. But, short of having it run across, but then again, you have to ask yourself who else should have noticed it if it's running across the parking lot besides the landscape. But I haven't heard of a situation where that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's probably more specific details to that particular instance, but it is I actually liked the question because it does happen. As you said, we typically have sensors. We typically have the ability to see certain things, and you guys have had some great options evolve over the last couple of years. So it's really, as with a lot of things, friends, it's, do you have the capability to pay for the things that you want? Is your stomach or are your eyes larger than your stomach can hold, kind of thing? But some of those are also incredibly valid and necessary. If you have failing pipes or if you don't know where your irrigation schedule is, that's another thing. We didn't kind of talk about that, but you can have that scoped if necessary. It's quite expensive, but I want to point out with irrigation maps, what the developer had approved with what actually got finished, especially if you're dealing with multiple phase associations or a builder that has multiple builders. That's typically where we see that irrigation map gets lost in translation, and modifications from that can deviate. So, Mike, it has been an absolute pleasure, and this topic is super near and dear to us. It's budget season, friends, so we really wanted to make sure that you had everything that you needed to going into the budget season so that you can appropriately budget and have conversations with your vendors, and that you also really, really understand what your responsibility is as a board, and then what your landscaper's responsibility is and where you are as far as communication. I think with everything that we do, so long as you communicate with us and give us the opportunity to have that conversation or make a correction if we made a mistake, nobody's perfect. And especially with what you do, Mike, I'm sure that there's a lot of room for human error. Truly human error. But on that note, Heritage University is available to each and every one of you on our website, heritageproperty.com. We also have a fantastic YouTube page, which for all of you that are joining us live, Thank you so much. This will be more than likely available to you within the next week on our YouTube page. And for those of you that have registered, you're going to get some really awesome goodies. And so thank you for everybody that gave us your Thursday evening. And we'll see you again in the audience really soon.